I just thought this morning that I'd call this page the Vipassana method, and then alongside that, quiet the mind. Through Vipassana meditation, we develop. I was just listening to an old interview between Oprah Winfrey and Eckhart Tolle, and Oprah Winfrey describes the process as strengthening one's spiritual muscle. Osho often referred to this business of becoming the watcher, the observer of the mind. It's the being, not the doing, isn't it? Osho often referred to it as a knack. He describes it sometimes as being very arduous to begin with, because we're so permanently lost in our thoughts and our emotions. We might take a little time once a day to develop this watchfulness, but slowly but surely we get the hang of it. It becomes more and more of a knack. And when we talk about quieting the mind, sometimes one might think, well, then we might make the mistake. Does that mean dumbing down the mind? No. When we say, Eckhart talks about going beyond the mind, and then he jokes, not going below the mind. That's alcohol, that's drugs. Indulging in all sorts of sensory pleasures as an escape. That's going below the mind. But rising above the mind is to become the observer of the mind. Now, I was reading Eckhart's book, The Power of Now, this morning, and he so nicely speaks about going beyond the mind, not below the mind. And you see, this one particular question in this section, you are not the mind, you are not your mind, in the book The Power of Now, enlightenment, rising above thought. And the question is, isn't thinking essential in order to survive in this world? Answer, your mind is an instrument, a tool. It is there to be used for a specific task, and when the task is completed, you lay it down. As it is, I would say about 80 to 90% of most people's thinking is not only repetitive and useless, but because of its dysfunctional and often negative nature, much of it is also harmful. Observe your mind and you will find this to be true. It causes a serious leakage of vital energy. This kind of compulsive thinking is actually an addiction. What characterizes an addiction? Quite simply this: you no longer feel that you have the choice to stop. It seems stronger than you. It also gives you a false sense of pleasure that invariably turns into pain. And then the question is asked, I don't want to lose my ability to analyze and discriminate. I wouldn't mind learning to think more clearly in a more focused way, but I don't want to lose my mind. The gift of thought is the most precious thing we have. Without it, we would just be another species of animal. So the answer, the predominance of mind is no more than a stage in the evolution of consciousness. We need to go on to the next stage now as a matter of urgency. Otherwise, we will be destroyed by the mind, which has grown into a monster. I will talk about this in more detail later. Thinking and consciousness are not symptoms. Thinking and consciousness are not synonymous. Thinking is only a small aspect of consciousness. Thought cannot exist without consciousness, but consciousness does not need thought. Enlightenment means rising above thought, not falling back to a level below thought, the level of an animal or a plant. In the enlightened state, you still use your thinking mind when needed, but in a much more focused and effective way than before. You use it mostly for practical purposes, but you are free of the involuntary internal dialogue, and there is inner stillness. When you do use your mind, and particularly when a creative solution is needed, you oscillate every few minutes or so between thought and stillness, between mind and no mind. No mind is consciousness without thought. Only in that way is it possible to think creatively, because only in that way does thought have any real power. Thought alone, when it is no longer connected with the much vaster realm of consciousness, quickly becomes barren, insane, destructive. I'm just going to read the next few paragraphs quickly. I want to keep it under 10 minutes. The mind is essentially a survival machine, attack and defense against other minds, gathering, storing, and analyzing information. That is what it is good at, but it is not at all creative. All true artists, whether they know it or not, create from a place of no mind, from inner stillness. The mind then gives form to the creative impulse or insight. Even the great scientists have reported that their creative breakthrough came at a time of mental quietude. The surprising result of a nationwide inquiry among America's most eminent mathematicians, including Einstein, to find out their working methods was that thinking plays only a subordinate part in the brief, decisive phase of the creative act itself. So I would say that the simple reason why the majority of scientists are not creative is not because they don't know how to think, but because they don't know how to stop thinking. Yes, I'll leave it there. So this whole business, when Vipassana meditation, quiet the mind, this method is, if you're wanting to increase material possessions, increase things that you might think that meditation might take away from you. No, this is only to enhance and increase.